Hey everyone, let's take a look at some more Hollywood January madness. Between 1993 and 1995, studios dumped 10 films into theaters that collectively lost somewhere between $180 and $200 million. We've got Madonna, we've got Oliver Stone fresh off an Oscar, we've got Tim Burton walking away from a project mid-production. There's a film that sat on a shelf for 4 years, got all its musical numbers cut, and still flopped anyway. And one movie made only $428,000 despite getting good reviews at Cannes Film Festival. Which disaster hurt the most? Let's find out. Body of Evidence was Madonna's attempt to become the next Sharon Stone. It didn't work. Dino De Laurentiis gave her $30 million to star in an erotic thriller about a woman accused of using her body as a weapon. Willem Dafoe played her defense attorney. Joe Mantegna was the prosecutor. For context, Basic Instinct had just made $352 million the year before. Studios were desperate for the next one. Break-even was somewhere around $75 million when you factor in marketing. Opening weekend pulled in $7.3 million. Not terrible. But then the second weekend dropped 59%. By the third weekend, it cratered another 73%. Final domestic total, $13.7 million. Worldwide, it scraped together $38 million. Rotten Tomatoes has it at 8%. Here's what went wrong. Madonna released her infamous book 2 months before the film came out. You'd think that would build buzz, but it did the opposite. Audiences had already seen everything. The curiosity factor was gone. The film was originally rated NC-17 and had to be cut for theatrical release. Roger Ebert gave it half a star and later put it on his personal list of most hated films. He called Madonna the queen of movies that were bad ideas right from the beginning. Critics compared it unfavorably to Basic Instinct at every turn. Julianne Moore, who played Dafoe's wife in a small role, later called her scene just awful and said she was too young to know better. This was Madonna's 4th consecutive flop after Shanghai Surprise, Who's That Girl, and Bloodhounds of Broadway. The Razzies gave her Worst Actress. I actually think the movie's found a second life now. It's campy enough to be entertaining. Shout Factory even released a Blu-ray collector's edition. But in January 1993, it was just embarrassing. Speaking of personal projects, Aspen Extreme came from writer-director Patrick Hasburg's own life. He'd been a ski instructor in Aspen throughout the 70s. One of his students, Disney chairman Michael Eisner. That connection got the film made. Hollywood Pictures gave him $14 million to make what they marketed as Top Gun on the ski slopes. Paul Gross and Peter Berg starred as Detroit factory workers chasing dreams in Colorado. It opened to $3.3 million. Second weekend dropped 45%. Final domestic gross, $8 million. That's 57% of its production budget before marketing costs. Disney took a loss of around $6 million minimum. The problem was creative compromise. Hasburg wanted something darker and more poetic. Disney wanted fighter jets on skis. The final film was neither. Professional extreme skiers Scott Schmidt and Doug Coombs served as stunt doubles for the powder sequences. Critics praised the skiing cinematography, but found the story underdeveloped. The Chicago Tribune called it extremely slow-moving and said it almost saves itself with spectacular downhill action scenes. That word almost tells you everything. There's also speculation that the Boycott Colorado movement following Amendment 2 hurt the film's reception. Ski movies have always been a tough sell anyway. The genre has a ceiling. I was surprised to learn this one developed a genuine cult following. Ski communities watch it ritually at the start of every season. South Park parodied it in the episode Aspen. The town hosted 30th anniversary screenings in 2023. Hasburg still talks about releasing a director's cut with his original darker vision. It flopped in 1993, but it found its people eventually. Matinee is the tragedy on this list. Joe Dante made a love letter to 1950s B-movies and showman William Castle. John Goodman played a Castle-inspired filmmaker, premiering a cheesy horror movie called Mant during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Dante even cast actual 1950s sci-fi actors like Kevin McCarthy from the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Critics gave it 93% on Rotten Tomatoes. Roger Ebert said he had a wide smile on my face the whole time. It's genuinely wonderful. Universal released it on Super Bowl weekend. That's historically the worst theatrical weekend of the entire year. Opening gross, $3.6 million. Final domestic total, $9.5 million against a $14 million budget. The studio officially deemed it a failure. Here's where it gets frustrating. The financing company paying for production went bankrupt mid-shoot. Universal had only put in partial funding. Dante had to beg them to buy the whole movie. They did, reluctantly, and then sabotaged it with the release date. The marketing campaign couldn't explain what the film actually was. A nostalgic Cuban Missile Crisis comedy about a fake monster movie? That's a tough sell in 30 seconds. Jerry Goldsmith composed the score. None of it mattered to audiences that weekend. You'd think a film this well-reviewed would find an audience. It didn't. Not in theaters anyway. But Matinee has been completely reappraised since. Arrow Films and Shout Factory have released special edition Blu-rays. Critics now call it a modern classic and essential viewing for film buffs. RogerEbert.com ran a 30th anniversary piece calling it ripe for rediscovery. Joe Dante made something beautiful. Universal just didn't know what to do with it. This next one's almost sad. Oliver Stone had just won Oscars for Platoon and Born on the 4th of July. Heaven and Earth was supposed to complete his Vietnam trilogy. Warner Brothers gave him $33 million to tell the story from a Vietnamese civilian woman's perspective, based on Lê Hayslip's memoirs. For the lead role, Stone held open auditions in Little Saigon. 16,000 people showed up. He cast Hep Tile, a pre-med student with zero acting experience who attended just for fun. Limited release on Christmas Day, 1993, pulled $379,000 from 63 theaters. Wide release on January 7th added 781 theaters. It made $1.7 million. Final domestic gross, $5.9 million. That's less than 18% of the budget. Stone was staring at $27 million in losses. The failure had multiple causes. Critics felt Stone had returned to Vietnam one time too many. Variety said the sledgehammer approach to storytelling merely results in audience numbness. The 140-minute runtime tested patience. It was competing against Schindler's List for serious adult audiences. Japanese musician Kitaro won a Golden Globe for the score, beating Schindler's List and The Piano. And honestly, American viewers in 1994 weren't interested in the Vietnamese perspective. Tommy Lee Jones, who co-starred, called it a noble failure. Stone later described it as his most soulful movie, but soulful doesn't pay back $33 million. The lead actress, Hep T. Lee, was herself a Vietnamese refugee who fled by boat at age 9. Stone said she just had the light. She didn't pursue extensive acting afterward. She became a restaurateur. She passed in 2017. The film deserved better. So did she. Cabin Boy opened the same day as Heaven and Earth. Tim Burton was originally attached to direct this absurdist fantasy comedy. Chris Elliott and Adam Resnick wrote the script specifically for Burton's visual style, including bizarre creatures like a six-armed goddess and a half-man, half-shark character. Then Burton got offered Ed Wood. He dropped out of directing but stayed on as producer. Resnick, who had never directed anything, was pushed into the chair. He didn't want to be there. Touchstone gave them $10 million. Opening weekend, $1.5 million. It debuted in 13th place. Final gross, $3.6 million. Chris Elliott got a Razzie nomination for Worst New Star. The test screenings were disasters. Resnick later said people didn't just walk out, you could hear them muttering angrily under their breath. Elliott's high-pitched character voice and short pants apparently pushed audiences over the edge. David Letterman had a cameo credited under a fake name and spent the next year mocking himself on his show for appearing in a flop. Elliott said the failure made him want to hide, and he never fully recovered that confidence. Resnick admitted if they could change two things, they'd lose the helium accent and the shorts. Here's what's interesting though. Cabin Boy became a cult classic anyway. Hip-hop producer Dan the Automator named his publishing company after the half-shark character. Kool Keith sampled the movie on Dr. Octagon Ecologist. Kurt Cobain apparently loved it. The Ringer wrote a retrospective arguing that Cabin Boy's weird humor paved the way for Conan O'Brien, Mr. Show, and Adult Swim. It failed in 1994, but it influenced everything that came after. Body Snatchers might be the most frustrating entry on this list. Abel Ferrara directed the third adaptation of Jack Finney's classic novel, following the 1956 original and the 1978 remake. The story was moved to a military base starring Gabrielle Anwar, Terry Kinney, and Forest Whitaker. It premiered at Cannes in competition for the Palme d'Or. Reviews were strong. Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars and called it by far the best of all the Body Snatchers films. Warner Brothers released it to a few dozen theaters with zero marketing. Total gross, $428,868. That's not a typo. A $13 million film made less than $500,000. It recovered 3.3% of its budget. That's one of the worst wide-release performances of the entire decade. The studio just abandoned it. TV Tropes literally has this film tagged as screwed by the network. Ferrara clashed with Warner Brothers during editing, particularly with legendary editor Dede Allen. He later said he butted heads because I don't like anybody telling me what to do. The military base setting was supposed to add tension. Ferrara thought it was the worst starting point for the story. Meg Tilly delivered a now legendary monologue that critics still praise as the film's highlight. None of it mattered. Warner Brothers had already decided to let it disappear. Modern reassessment has been kinder. Bloody Disgusting called it the definition of a hidden horror gem. MoMA included it in an Abel Ferrara retrospective. Some critics now argue it's the best version of the story ever made. Ferrara himself said he'd like to do a remake. The 1994 version deserved an actual release. It never got one. Iron Will came out the same day as Body Snatchers. Disney made a family dog sled adventure based loosely on the 1917 Winnipeg to St. Paul race. Mackenzie Aston starred as a young man racing to save his family's farm. Kevin Spacey played a journalist following the race. Brian Cox was the villain. They spent $30 million on it, heavy TV advertising, MLK Day weekend release. They were expecting a hit. Opening weekend, $5.3 million. Final domestic gross, $21 million. That's 70% of the production budget before marketing. CinemaScore audiences gave it an A+, which is incredibly rare. Only about 52 films have ever received that grade. Critics were lukewarm at 67% on Rotten Tomatoes. You'd think an A+ CinemaScore would translate to legs. It didn't. The film was too formulaic. Roger Ebert called it an identikit plot put together out of standard pieces. Here's the thing though, the real-life inspiration, Fred Hartman, came in last place in the actual race. The movie has him winning. Historical accuracy wasn't the priority. Disney wanted an underdog story. They got one. Filming took place across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Montana during brutal winter conditions. It just didn't make money. I honestly forgot this movie existed until I researched this video. It's available on Disney Plus now. Kevin Spacey has a supporting role which complicates modern viewing. It's the definition of solid but forgettable. Audiences loved it. Critics shrugged. The box office said no. Car 54 is the strangest disaster here. Orion Pictures made a movie adaptation of a 1960s TV sitcom about bumbling New York cops. They shot it in 1990 as a full musical comedy, with song and dance numbers throughout. David Johansen, better known as Buster Poindexter, starred alongside John C. McGinley. Fran Drescher and Rosie O'Donnell had supporting roles. Then Orion filed for bankruptcy with $690 million in debt. The film sat in a vault for 4 years. When they finally released it in January 1994, they had cut all the musical numbers. Budget, $10.7 million. Final gross, $1.2 million. That's an 11% recovery. Rotten Tomatoes, 0%. Not low, 0. Rosie O'Donnell won a Razzie for Worst Supporting Actress. The director, Bill Fishman, said he would have used the Alan Smithee pseudonym, but he didn't even know the film had been released until he got a royalty check. John C. McGinley, who co-starred, later explained the disaster. "We shot it as a musical, and whoever the powers that be were, cut all but like 2 musical numbers out of it. That is the same as cutting the musical numbers out of The Wizard of Oz." He's right. The film makes no sense without them. Orion was a zombie studio at that point. They had 10 completed films stuck in limbo and released all of them. Every single one flopped. This is the most forgotten film on the list. The target audience for a 1960s sitcom adaptation was already dying off in 1994. 4 years of delay made it worse. Cutting the musical numbers destroyed whatever vision existed. Car 54 didn't just fail, it was set up to fail. Bad Company might be the biggest disaster here in pure dollar terms. Touchstone Pictures reportedly spent around $50 million on a neo-noir thriller starring Lawrence Fishburne and Ellen Barkin as corporate spies in a shadowy consulting firm. Frank Langella co-starred. Damian Harris directed from a screenplay by novelist Ross Thomas. The budget was never officially confirmed, which tells you something. Disney planned a wide release. Then executives saw a scene between Fishburne and Barkin. They got nervous about the content. At the last minute, they pulled the wide release and dumped it into roughly 300 theaters. Final gross, $3.6 million. If that $50 million budget is accurate, Disney lost over $46 million. Here's the part that stings. Fishburne reportedly chose this role over a part in Pulp Fiction. Imagine that career decision. You turn down Tarantino for a film that your own studio buries. Roger Ebert actually liked it. He called it a thinking man's Grisham film and praised its sleek cruelty. Variety disagreed, saying it fails even on the erotic level. The cinema score was a C, which means audiences who did see it weren't impressed either. Bad Company eventually found profitability on home video. Video Store magazine called it a lucrative success in that market. Kino Lorber released a Blu-ray years later with director commentary, but theatrically, it's a cautionary tale. Disney didn't believe in their own product, and Fishburne missed his Tarantino moment. Murder in the First opened the same day as Bad Company. Kevin Bacon stars as Henry Young, an Alcatraz prisoner kept in solitary confinement 4 years. Christian Slater plays his young public defender. Gary Oldman played the sadistic associate warden. Warner Brothers spent $20 million on it. Bacon lost 20 pounds for the role. He spent a night in an actual solitary cell to understand the isolation. This had serious talent. Opening weekend, $4.7 million. Final domestic, $17.4 million. Worldwide, it reached $29.5 million, which technically exceeds the production budget. But after marketing, it was a marginal loss at best. Cinema score was a minus. Audiences responded. Critics were mixed at 56%. The problem was timing. The Shawshank Redemption had come out a year earlier. Any prison drama was going to suffer by comparison. Slater was seen as too young for his role. The historical liberties bothered critics. The real Henry Young was actually a hardened criminal, not a petty thief. The screenwriter was reportedly unhappy with the changes and later adapted the screenplay into a stage play. Bacon won the very first Critics' Choice Award for Best Actor. He got 0 Oscar nominations. 0 Golden Globe nominations. It's still cited as one of the great Oscar snubs. Production was interrupted by the 1994 Northridge earthquake. Bacon later described surfing on the parking lot as the ground shook. Slater's trailer crashed onto its side. They filmed at Alcatraz at night because the National Park Service didn't want to disrupt daytime tourism. 300 crew members crammed into prison cells. Bacon gave everything to this role. Awards voters didn't notice. January in the early 90s wasn't just a bad time to release movies. It was where Hollywood sent films to be forgotten. Warner Brothers abandoned Body Snatchers despite Cannes' acclaim. Disney buried Bad Company because of one scene. Orion released Car 54 without telling its own director. Universal dumped Matinee on Super Bowl weekend. These weren't just failures of product. They were failures of faith. Studios had given up before audiences ever got a chance. The pattern is clear. Creative compromises destroyed Aspen Extreme and Cabin Boy. Corporate cowardice buried Bad Company and Body Snatchers. Poor timing killed Matinee and Iron Will. Madonna's ego sank Body of Evidence. Stone's ambition exceeded audience appetite. Some of these films deserve better, some didn't. But all of them ended up in the same place, January, where movies went to disappear.